Marcus thought money could buy anything: a wedding venue, a familyist loyalty, even Chloe's silence. He walked into the lodge with cash in an envelope, expecting people to fold because men like him always believed everyone had a price. But what he didn't know was that Chloe already started collecting proof: every call, every message, every insult, dressed up as family concerns, and behind the quiet bride he underestimated stood lawyers, contracts, and one devastating truth: fake power collapses fast when real evidence enters the room.
The sander went quiet. I slid my hand across the walnut tabletop. It was smooth as glass. A gift from my sister, Sophie, or more like a joke, a warped piece of wood she'd deemed worthless. My father's voice crackled from my phone. "You have to see the bigger picture, Ava. He might as well have been on the moon. Sophie's just having a rough time with Julian, and seeing you with a successful business, it's not a great look. I can't walk you down the aisle if she's in the pews feeling like a failure. My wedding was 3 days away, 72 hours, and my own dad was bailing. This wasn't some last-minute crisis. It was a choice. He was choosing to protect my sister's ego over my wedding day." "Your father is right," my mother chimed in. I could almost hear the clink of vases in their perfect Boston home. "Just have the officiant do it. It's very modern, very independent. It's really not a big deal. You think your family is supposed to be your rock. You're wrong. Sometimes they're the ones who shove you off the cliff. If you've ever been pushed aside so someone else could take the spotlight, you know what to do. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button. And share your story in the comments below. I read every single one. I am your hosts, and this is Final Notice, the story you've been waiting for. I put the sander down. No tears, no begging, no demanding to know why they'd sabotage my wedding just to coddle a 30-year-old. The girl who would have pleaded with them 10 years ago was gone. In her place was someone with a backbone of steel. My mind snapped back to a loud school gym. I was 14, standing next to a bookshelf I'd built, one that had just won the City Woodworking Prize. A blue ribbon was pinned proudly to the top. And right next to my project? 2 empty seats. My parents had missed it. Sophie had a piano lesson on the other side of town. So this wasn't a new kind of betrayal, just a bigger one. "Okay," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "I understand." You could hear the relief on the other end of the line. "Oh, good! You were always the reasonable one, Ava. We'll just pop in for the ceremony, then head out. We have to help Sophie set up her big anniversary gala that evening." "I'll see you Saturday," I said, and hung up. Then I opened my phone again. My thumb tapped a password-protected app, opening a file I'd been building for 6 long months. The folder's title was simple: Leverage. I uploaded the recording of their call, and the progress bar filled in a second. Outside, a bitter Boston wind howled against the windows. I was 29, the owner of a custom furniture business my family called my cute little hobby. I was used to the cold. I learned to thrive in it. I scrolled to my texts and found Ethan Cole, the man I was about to marry. To my family, he was just a history professor in a beat-up tweed jacket. Nothing compared to Sophia's high-powered husband. They had no clue who Ethan really was. They never bothered to find out. I sent him a quick message. "Dad's not walking me down the aisle. Says it would upset Sophie." I set my phone down, braced for a flurry of texts, maybe a worried call. 30 seconds later, a single message lit up my screen. Ethan didn't offer sympathy. He didn't text his outrage. His message was simple. "Don't worry, I've got the perfect wedding gift for them. To understand why my dad would detonate my wedding, you have to know what my family worships. And that God has a name, Julian." My brother-in-law, Julian Vance, was a hedge fund guy, the type who wears designer sweats to brunch and dangles his car keys so everyone sees the logo. He paid for my parents' entire lifestyle, their country club membership, my mother's new luxury car, all of it. In return, my parents, Robert and Eleanor, gave him their total, unquestioning loyalty. Julian owned them, which meant he made the rules. 2 weeks before that phone call, we were at some overpriced seafood place on the harbour, where the entrees cost more than my rent. Ethan and I were crammed in the corner of the booth, sipping water while Julian held court at the head of the table, complaining loudly about the wine. "So, Ethan," he boomed, making sure the whole restaurant could hear him, Still playing with old books for a living? When are you getting a real job? A man your age should be building a portfolio, not a bookshelf. My father let out a weak little chuckle, desperate to please the man paying for dinner. My hands clenched into fists in my lap. I started to speak, but Ethan put a calm, steady hand on my knee. He didn't look angry. He didn't even seem fazed. He just looked at Julian like a scientist studying a strange, loud insect. History has its rewards, Ethan said, his voice low and even. It teaches you how to spot a fake. Julian just snorted. Right. Well, in the real world, we build the future. Take my new waterfront development. We're building a huge biotech campus, cutting-edge labs, luxury apartments, the works. It's going to completely transform the South Harbour. My mother leaned in, her eyes shining with fake admiration. That's amazing, Julian. You're a true visionary. I do my best, Eleanor, he said, slinging an arm around my sister's shoulders. The only snag is one little property issue. We have the money, we have the permits, but the main access road has to cut through an old shipyard next door, and the owner is some ancient fossil who refuses to sell. A fossil? My father asked, eager to be part of the grown-up conversation. Some old relic sitting on a gold mine, Julian complained, waving his fork. He won't give us access, won't even take a meeting. He doesn't get it. He's blocking billions in progress for a nice view of the water. My lawyers will figure out a way to take it from him. You can't fight the future. Ethan took a slow sip of his water. Some people just value a quiet harbour more than a loud return on investment, he said, almost to himself. Julian sneered. Spoken like a man who's never seen real money. Real money builds things, Ethan. Sophie, tired of her husband hogging the spotlight, tapped her glass with a fork. Speaking of building things and big news, she announced, her voice suddenly high and piercing. Julian and I are throwing a massive anniversary gala. We have some major investors coming in who we absolutely have to impress. My mother clapped her hands together. Sophie, how lovely! A party! When are you thinking of having it? Sophie looked right at me, a nasty, triumphant little smirk on her face. This Saturday, May 24th. I know it's terribly short notice, but it's the only weekend our investors could fly in, so our hands are tied. The entire table fell silent. May 24th, my wedding day. The invitations had been mailed 6 months ago. My parents didn't say a word. They didn't even look at me. My father suddenly found his dinner plate fascinating, while my mother immediately went into damage control mode. Well, she said, her voice strained, that will certainly make for a busy day. We can absolutely go to both events, I'm sure of it, right, Robert? Of course, my father muttered, way too fast. A big day for everyone. I just sat there, ice pumping through my veins. This was no accident. This was a direct hit. Sophie picked that date on purpose to force our parents to choose, to show everyone who really mattered. She wanted to prove, in front of everyone, that her party was a bigger deal than my marriage. It was a power play, pure and simple, meant to put me back in my place. When the dinner from hell finally ended, we stepped out into the freezing Boston night. We walked to the Valor stand where Julian's new, screaming red Porsche was parked, shining under the lights. Next to it sat Ethan Esquire, a 5-year-old sedan. Julian clicked his key fob and the Porsche beeped obnoxiously. "Drive safe," he called out, his voice dripping with condescension. "Don't want that old thing breaking down on you." Ethan walked calmly past the driver's side of the sports car. He paused for a beat, and his eyes fell to Julian's wrist, to the obscenely expensive watch he'd been showing off all night. He looked at the watch, then he looked Julian dead in the eye. "Nice watch," Ethan said. "Patek Philippe Grand Complication. Right? It's a beautiful piece of engineering." Julian stopped cold. The smug look on his face completely evaporated, replaced by a flash of raw panic. His hand froze, hovering just inches from his car door. "It's a business write-off," Julian snapped, his voice suddenly brittle. "It's an investment." "A very smart one," Ethan agreed, giving him a small knowing smile. "Have a good night." We got into our car. As we pulled away, I saw Julian in the rearview mirror, still frozen by his Porsche, not moving. He looked utterly terrified that some quiet history professor had just spotted the $1,000 counterfeit watch on his wrist. I just rested my head against the window and watched the city lights smear past. I couldn't stop replaying dinner, that look on my sister Sophia S. face when my parents just folded. She S. always been the delicate orchid, needing constant praise and lavish parties just to function. She thrives on expensive cars and a crowd of fans telling her how special she is. Without it, she'd just fall apart. I've spent my career designing landscapes. I understand that real strength builds quietly, underground. I was putting down the kind of roots that get you through a bitter Colorado winter. My family thought I'd just dry up and blow away without their blessing. They had no clue what was coming. It was 2 days before my wedding, and my studio smelled like pine and charcoal sketches. I was at my desk, carefully arranging pressed wildflowers in glass frames for the tables. This was my safe space. In here I had control. Plans could be changed, lines could be erased, something beautiful could be made. But outside of these walls, my life was a mess. My phone buzzed against the wood. Jessica Moore. She runs the Aspen Mountain Lodge, the venue for my wedding to Leo, in just 2 days. Jessica was also a friend. She sold my art prints in the lodge's gift shop. I brushed the drawing dust off my hands and answered. "Penny, you need to hear this," she said. Her voice tight, all business. The usual friendliness was gone. "Your brother-in-law Marcus is standing in my office. He just threw a fat envelope of cash on my desk and told me to name my price. He wants to cancel your wedding and book the whole lodge for Saturday." My hand stopped mid-air. His nerve felt like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just about one-upping us with a bigger party. He was trying to buy our wedding right out from under us. "What did you say?" I asked. My voice was just a whisper. "I told him our contract is solid," Jessica replied. "He just laughed and said everybody has a price. He offered 10 grand cash to cancel on you and give the whole venue to his guests. I told him to get out, or I was calling security. Penny, sit in the lobby making calls right now. You have to deal with this." "Don't you sign a thing, Jessica. I am coming now." I slammed the phone down and tore off my apron. My work gloves slapped against the table. Marcus seriously thought he could buy his way out of basic human decency, that he could just write a check and I'd disappear. I snatched my keys and stormed outside, squinting in the bright Colorado light. Just as I got to my car, a sleek black Escalade pulled into my drive. The engine hummed with quiet power. The driver's door opened and Maya Sterling stepped out. Maya was Leo's big sister, a corporate lawyer from New York who specialized in tearing companies apart. She wore a suit that screamed authority and had eyes that saw everything. Maya had a reputation for destroying cocky men in boardrooms before their first coffee. "Get in the car," Maya said. Her voice was soft, but it was an order. I froze. "How did you know?" "Leo called me," she said, opening the passenger door. "He deals with the scenery, I deal with the snakes, and your brother-in-law is a snake. Get in, Penny. We're getting lunch. You look like you need it, and it's time we set some clear boundaries." I sank into the leather seat. The inside of the car smelled like success and very expensive perfume. Maya pulled out, heading for downtown Aspen with the same fierce concentration she probably gave legal documents. We ended up at an expensive bistro on the main street, you know the type, with rustic beams, dim lights, and staff who remember you. Maya asked for a corner table where we could see the entrance. She ordered a salad and an espresso. I ordered a sandwich there was no I could eat. "Your family sees your boundaries as a game." Maya said, cutting right to the point. "This isn't an accident, it's a calculated move. Your independence threatens their whole system. Marcus uses his money to control your parents. Since you don't need his cash, he has no power over you, and that drives him crazy." I drew a line in the sweat on my water glass. I know. I just didn't think he was capable of this. Buying out my venue 2 days before the wedding, it's completely unhinged. "It's panic," Maya corrected. "People with real power don't need to throw cash around. He's doing this because his entire fantasy world is about to collapse." Before I could even answer, the little bell on the door chimed. I glanced up, and my heart sank. It was Sophia, with our mother, Eleanor, right behind her. Both of them were holding shopping bags from some high-end boutique. Sophia was in a stupidly expensive coat, her hair perfectly styled. She scanned the room, and her eyes found our table. A slow, smug grin appeared on her face as she strolled over, dragging our mother with her like a handbag. "Penny, what a shock seeing you here," Sophia chirped. Her gaze jumped to Maya, immediately sizing up the expensive suit and confident attitude. "We were just getting a few last-minute things for our little get-together. The guest list just keeps growing. Marcus's partners expect a certain standard. After all," she glanced at my full glass of water with phony sympathy, "it's a shame your little wedding can't afford a real floral designer. But I guess weeds from the side of the road are cute, in a country bumpkin kind of way." My mom gave a pathetic little smile and looked away. Before I could fire back, Maya lifted one perfectly manicured hand and set it on the table. That tiny gesture shut everyone up. "You must be Sophia?" Maya said, her voice like polished steel. "Leo S. told me so much about you." Sophia preened, shifting her expensive purse. "Oh, well, I hope it was all good things." Maya's smile was absolutely glacial. "He did mention your husband develops luxury real estate. It's a very interesting field. I'm in corporate finance in New York. We see plenty of developers just like your Marcus." Sophia's smug look flickered for a second. "Like Marcus?" "That's right," Maya went on, her tone casual, like she was talking about brunch. "The kind that borrow way too much money, who use shady lenders to fill the holes in their main financing. It's a high-wire act. You miss a single payment, violate one tiny clause, and the banks call in the entire loan. The fancy cars go back, the club membership gets cancelled, the whole fantasy just pops." All the colour vanished from her face. Suddenly she just looked pale under all that pricey makeup. She blinked fast, her eyes jumping between Maya and me. "I have no idea what you're implying. Marcus is a huge success. He's closing a giant deal this weekend." "I'm sure he is," Maya said, taking a slow sip of her espresso. "But I only read financial reports, not news articles. Enjoy the party, Sophia. I do hope the decorations are worth it." Sophia's mouth opened, but nothing came out. She threw a terrified glance at our mom, yanked her arm, and nearly ran out of the restaurant. The door chimed as they scurried out. I stared at the empty air where they had been, my heart pounding. I'd never seen anyone take my sister apart so fast, so thoroughly, and without even raising her voice. "That," Maya said, putting her cup down, "is how you deal with a bully. You never yell. You don't fight about the small stuff. You just calmly and quietly let them see the long drop waiting for them." I looked at Maya, feeling both amazed and incredibly sad. My own family was trying to ruin my marriage. And this woman, practically a stranger, was the only person fighting for me. "You need to build a fortress, Penny," Maya said, her lawyer voice softening, "because they won't stop taking until you have nothing left." I looked at my hands, soil still under my nails from work. I know I need to cut them off. I know they're poison, but a small part of me still wants my father to walk me down the aisle. I just want him to choose me, for once. Maya reached out and took my hand. Her grip was firm and reassuring. "We take care of our own, Penny. Your dad has a decision to make. If he makes the wrong one, I swear the whole Sterling family will have your back. You will not walk down that aisle by yourself." We ate the rest of our lunch without talking. Maya drove me home, the tires of her big SUV crunching on my gravel driveway. I thanked her, feeling stronger, like she'd given me a shield. But when I got out of the car and looked at my greenhouse, I stopped cold. A beat-up old pickup truck was parked by the loading area. An older man in a worn-out Stetson hat and work coat stood there, looking at my sage plants. He could have passed for any local rancher, the type you see all over Colorado, but I knew exactly who it was. And just then, my phone buzzed with a text from my father. The day wasn't over yet. I went to the old sedan, waiting by my bakery's delivery doors. The man inside was Arthur Vance. Anyone else would see a retired fisherman, a face lined by the sea, a simple coat, and old leather shoes. But he was so much more. My parents met him once and wrote him off as just some guy from the docks. They didn't know Arthur Vance owned the entire port, the bank that funded it, and most of the best real estate on Seattle's waterfront. He was a shipping tycoon who'd rather discuss the weather than go to a black tie event. We met 2 years ago. Arthur has a deadly allergy to most grains, and his doctors were sure a real birthday cake was impossible. I spent 3 weeks creating a new baking method with rare botanicals and nut flours. It worked. He ate his first slice of cake in 30 years. My family calls my bakery a cute little cupcake business, but it earned me the unwavering loyalty of the most powerful man in Seattle. "You look like you saw a ghost, Chloe," Arthur said, his voice low and steady. "Just wedding jitters, Arthur, that's all." He didn't buy it for a second. His intense eyes saw right through my fake smile. "I'm here for my weekly pastry order," he said, pointing to a box on my counter. "But I have time for a coffee if you need to talk. You seem off." I poured him a cup from the machine in my office. We stood there in the warm, vanilla-scented bakery. For months I'd buried my hurt playing the part of the good daughter, but today's betrayal, plus his simple kindness, broke me. The walls came down. I told him absolutely everything. I told him my father wasn't walking me down the aisle anymore. I told him about the fundraiser they were throwing specifically to ruin my wedding day. I explained how my dad was siding with my brother-in-law, not me. Arthur just stood there and listened. No useless sympathies. He just sipped his espresso, his jaw tight. "This brother-in-law, remind me of his name?" Arthur's voice was different now, colder. "Julian?" I sniffled. "Julian Croft. He owns a tech startup. My parents invested a lot, so whatever Julian wants, he gets." Arthur said nothing. He just placed his cup down with a quiet, sharp click. A flicker of icy recognition flashed across his face. He tilted his head, connecting the dots. "Julian Croft," Arthur repeated. "The one behind that irritating Streamline Logistics company. He needs my Warehouse 7 for his big launch." I just stared, shocked he even knew the name. Yes, he was just whining about some stubborn old man blocking his company's future. A slow, chilling smile spread across Arthur's face. It was the kind of smile that meant a storm was coming. He pulled out a fat money clip and put the cash down for the pastries. "Keep it," he said, fixing his collar. His eyes met mine, and they were like steel. A father is supposed to protect his daughter's future. If he's not going to do his job, someone else will. He nodded once, grabbed his box, and walked to his car. I watched him drive off, and it suddenly hit me. Julian's stubborn old man problem was about to have a very, very bad day. I barely had time to process it when my phone buzzed. It was a new text from my father. I opened it, a foolish piece of me actually hoping he was sorry. Instead, I read a message that made his conditional love perfectly clear. He wrote about a delicate situation. Julian's main investors needed top seats at our reception. He suggested I uninvite the Vance family, my future in-laws, to make room. If I said no, he'd pull his $1,000 wedding cake contribution. "We have to be strategic," the text said. I read it twice. My father wanted me to kick out my own future family, the kindest people I've ever met, for a pack of venture capitalists. And he was trying to blackmail me over $1,000 for a cake I was baking myself. He really thought that would break me, just like it always worked with my mom. He actually believed I would trade my own dignity for his pathetic check. I didn't get mad. I didn't fire back a long, dramatic text about his betrayal. Why bother arguing with a man who puts a price tag on love? So I just put my thumbs on the screen and typed a single word. "No," and I sent it. I didn't even wait to see if he replied. I walked into my office, opened a drawer, and took out my business checkbook. With a steady hand, I wrote the name, Robert Miller. In the amount box, I wrote 1,000, and on the memo line, I wrote wedding cake refund. I tore the check out, folded it neatly, and slid it into a crisp business envelope. I wrote my father's address, put a stamp on it, and placed it with the mail going out. My father thought $1,000 bought him the right to control my wedding. He thought it gave him power to insult the family I chose. By returning his money, I was cancelling his ticket to my life. I didn't need his transactional favours for my marriage, and I certainly didn't need his permission to stand with my new family. That envelope on my desk was the last of a bridge I had just burned, and it felt amazing. I had finally set a boundary. I had said no. But I knew my family. Pushing back only ever made them push harder. My mother, Catherine, was supposed to join me for my final dress fitting the next day. It was the only traditional mother-daughter thing we had planned. I stared at that envelope, a cold knot forming in my stomach. My father would get my message in the morning. He would know I chose my new family over Julian's business deals. And I was sure my mother's appearance at that fitting would be the next thing he'd take away. The morning of my fitting was bright and sunny, the kind of Seattle day I normally loved. But not today. Today it just felt cruel. I stood in my bedroom, staring at the message my mother sent 15 minutes ago. "So sorry, darling." It said, "But your sister Olivia is having a major crisis." Apparently the hairstylist for their fundraiser cancelled, and my mother had to drive across town to handle it. You know how she is about these things. So, she couldn't come. "You'll look gorgeous no matter what," she added. "Send me photos!" I stared at the words until they blurred. My mom was ditching our only bridal moment because my 30-year-old sister had a meltdown. For a party meant to hurt me, I didn't reply. I locked my phone, grabbed my purse, and drove to the bridal shop in Belltown all by myself. The salon was beautiful, full of champagne-coloured silk and soft, warm lights. The owner, a very stylish woman named Isabel, greeted me with a warm smile that somehow made the ache in my chest feel 10 times sharper. I put on the gown, a silk crepe dress with delicate, hand-stitched flowers on the top. It was absolutely perfect. Isabel helped me onto the platform in front of the big 3-way mirror. "Where is your mother today?" she asked gently while she fixed the train. She was so excited to see it finished. "She had a family emergency," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. In the mirror, I looked just like a bride. But being there alone, the tough exterior I'd kept up for weeks finally started to crumble. I realized I was grieving for people who were still here. I was mourning the parents I should have had, not the ones I got, the ones who always chose my sister's fake drama over my biggest moments. A single hot tear escaped and ran down my cheek. I squeezed my eyes shut, so angry at myself for being weak. Just then, a soft chime announced that someone had opened the boutique door. I heard the soft, confident click of heels coming my way. "You look absolutely breathtaking, Chloe," a calm voice said. I opened my eyes. Eleanor Vance stood there in the doorway, wearing a classic trench coat over a chic dress and holding 2 lattes. "Eleanor," I whispered, wiping the tear away as fast as I could. "What are you doing here?" "Liam told me your mother had a last-minute issue," Eleanor said. Her voice was calm, but her sharp eyes missed nothing. "I just finished a meeting nearby and thought you might want a second opinion for the final fitting." She walked toward me, handed me a coffee, and then stepped back to look at the dress. She didn't offer any pity or ask about my mother. She just filled the space with her strong, reassuring presence. "The embroidery is stunning," Eleanor said, nodding with certainty. "It's elegant and powerful, just like you." "Isabel, maybe we could take the waist in just a tiny bit? It has to be perfect." For the next hour, Eleanor was the mother I desperately wished I had. She offered opinions on veils, we talked about shoes, and she gave me sincere, smart compliments. When Isabel came back with the final bill, I reached for my purse, but Eleanor was faster. She'd already handed Isabel her black credit card. "Eleanor, no," I protested, my face turning red with embarrassment. "I can pay for it. You've already done so much." Eleanor turned to me, her face softening but her voice still firm. "Put your wallet away, Chloe. It's handled." "But I can't let you do that," I insisted. "You didn't let me," Eleanor said, simply as she signed the receipt I offered. "You are marrying my son in 2 days. That makes you my family now. And the Vance. We take care of our own. Your mother made her decision today, and now I have made mine. Now, let's go get some lunch before the rehearsal." The rehearsal dinner was that night, at a beautiful restaurant on a pier overlooking the water. The vibe was perfect for Liam, and me it was cozy, intimate, and full of laughter. The entire Sterling family showed up. His aunts, uncles, and cousins had flown in from New York and LA to fill the mountain lodge. They were all so accomplished doctors, artists, tech CEOs, but also so warm, making me feel like I already belonged. And yet, 4 empty chairs at our main table felt like a huge hole. My parents, my sister, and Ethan still hadn't shown up. For an hour I smiled and thanked Liam's relatives, trying my best to ignore the empty spaces on my side of the room. I kept glancing at the door, hoping my father would just walk in. The main course arrived, but those doors were still closed. I excused myself, just needing a moment in the restroom. Inside a stall, I pulled out my phone to check the time, but muscle memory kicked in and I opened Instagram. Sophia S. story was first, from 30 minutes ago. She was at a private table in Aspen's most exclusive steakhouse. It was all there, giant steaks, towers of seafood, and bottles of old champagne. Ethan's rich investors sat around the table, and right there with them were my own parents, Marcus and Elena, raising their glasses in a toast. So they weren't just running late. There wasn't any car trouble. They made a choice. They chose a business dinner for Ethan's partners instead of their own daughter's rehearsal dinner. I just stared at the phone, the picture burning into my brain, and Sophia's caption was the final stab. Family is who funds your vision. Here's to building empires. A cold, heavy knot formed in my stomach. The last bit of hope I had for my family was gone. I screenshotted the post and immediately saved it to my evidence folder. It was getting pretty thick with their betrayals. I washed my hands, fixed my lipstick, and walked back into the dining room. I didn't feel hurt. I felt focused. Liam stood waiting by the huge stone fireplace. He saw the change in my face immediately. He didn't have to ask what was wrong. He just pulled me into a long, quiet hug. "They aren't coming," I mumbled into his shirt. "They're at a dinner with Ethan's investors. Sophia posted it." Liam pulled back, his kind eyes turning to steel. "Let me see it." I handed him my photon with the screenshot up. He studied the photo, the fancy dinner, my smiling parents, and that horrible caption. A muscle jumped in his jaw. The relaxed, easygoing man I knew was gone. In his place was the guy who fought and won ruthless corporate takeovers. He handed my phone back, pulled out his own, and said quietly, "1 second." I watched him walk down a quiet hall toward the resort's private offices. He put the phone to his ear. I followed, hiding just around the corner because I had to know what was going on. Liam's voice was low, but it held absolute command. "Daniel, it's Sterling. Pull up the Red Mountain Project, Ethan's development in Aspen." "Yes, that's the one." He paused, listening. "I don't care about his profit margins," Liam said, his voice like ice. "He's been over-leveraged for 3 months. We were cutting him slack because of Chloe. That grace period is over." Another pause. "Call the loan," Liam ordered, "and execute the breach of contract clause. Now, start foreclosure on that commercial property first thing Monday morning. And Daniel, make sure his main lender knows exactly how deep in debt he is. We'll see how many investors stick around when his whole world comes crashing down." Liam ended the call and put his phone away. He turned and saw me standing there in the shadows. He didn't look guilty at all. He looked like a man protecting his wife from a threat. He walked over, put an arm around my waist, and led me back to the warm dining hall filled with his family. "We're done giving him passes?" Liam whispered, kissing my forehead. "His little fantasy ends on Monday. Now, let us go enjoy our night with the family that actually wanted to be here." The next morning, sunlight poured into the bridal suite at the Aspen Botanical Gardens. The room felt cool and smelled like pine, lavender, and crisp mountain air. The whole suite was designed to be peaceful. I sat in a big comfy chair as the makeup artist finished her work. The woman in the mirror looked calm, peaceful, and totally ready. Olivia stood by the window, intensely reading a legal document on her tablet. Her sapphire blue dress looked amazing against the rustic wood walls of the room. The entire vibe was calm, with none of the usual chaos my family always seemed to create. My phone buzzed on the vanity. The screen lit up. It was a new text from my mother, Elena. I picked it up. The text said, "Morning, sweetie. That breakfast with Ethan's partners ran really late. We're heading over now. We'll just grab seats in the back so we can slip out after you say your vows. Sophia needs help with her charity gala tonight. The event planners are a mess. We don't want to get in your way. So excited for you. I read it twice. A year ago, that message would have destroyed me. I would have texted back right away, begging them to stay longer, promising to change things, doing anything for their approval. But now, the words just felt hollow. They couldn't hurt me anymore. This just proved what I'd been denying since I was a kid. My own mother was treating my wedding like a small chore on her to-do list before she got to her real priorities. Sitting in the back wasn't just about convenience. It was a statement about how little I mattered to them. I put my phone down. I didn't cry. I didn't even bother to reply. Instead, I opened my personal banking app. I scrolled past my successful floral business accounts and went to my personal checking. I went straight to the pending payments. And there it was. Check number 305 for $500, payable to Marcus Ramirez. He'd threatened to cancel even that pathetic amount if I didn't uninvite Liam's parents to make room for Ethan's business partners. I hit the stop payment button. A prompt asked for the reason. I typed 4 simple words. Services no longer required. I pressed confirm. A green check mark flashed on the screen. That financial tie was officially severed. It was a small amount of money, but the act felt huge. I was done with their pay-for-love games. I locked my phone and put it in my clutch. From the suite second-story window, I had a clear view of the main parking area below. I heard the sound of tires on gravel. Ethan S. black G-Wagon pulled into a reserved spot by the gate, kicking up a little cloud of dust. My father got out, messing with his tie and looking down his nose at the venue. My mother got out next, holding her dress away from the ground with a disgusted look. Sophia was last. She was wearing a long, beaded pale gold dress, a colour way too close to white. A classic, pathetic attempt to steal the show. Ethan locked the car and the loud beep echoed in the quiet morning. As my family walked toward the garden gates, a line of black Suburbans pulled into the lot, moving in perfect, silent formation. These weren't Ubers. They had government plates and an undeniable aura of serious power. Men and women in expensive suits started getting out. I recognized some of them from Forbes and the Wall Street Journal. One was a tech billionaire known for his hostile takeovers. Another was the CEO of a huge New York private equity firm. Several of Olivia's top lawyer friends from Chicago were there too. My father stopped dead in his tracks, his eyes wide as he stared at the new arrivals. He puffed out his chest and turned to my mother with a smug, self-important grin. "Look at that, Elena," Marketer said, his voice carrying in the still air. "Ethan's contacts. He must have invited them to show everyone what a big shot he is. He's such a good match for Sophia, bringing this kind of influence to a small garden wedding." My mother nodded eagerly, taking my father's arm. They strolled through the gates, filled with a misplaced sense of pride, totally sure these powerful people were there for a failing real estate developer. They had no clue these powerful people were here for Liam, the man they wrote off as just some poor mountain guide. The heavy door to my suite opened. Anna, my wedding planner, came in, holding a clipboard. "It's time, Chloe," she said with a warm, calm smile. Olivia came over and fixed the lace on my dress. She squeezed my shoulder for support before heading downstairs to take her seat in the front row. I gathered my silk gown, stepped out of the suite, and started down the grand wooden staircase. Below, a string quartet began a soft melody that drifted across the beautiful gardens. I got to the huge doors of the main hall. They were still closed, a final barrier between me and the 150 guests waiting inside. I stood there alone, holding my bouquet of white hydrangeas and eucalyptus. My father wasn't there. There was no one to walk me down the aisle, no last-minute words of fatherly advice. Just the quiet sound of my dress on the stone floor. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath of the crisp aspen air, and prepared myself. I was about to open those doors and face the empty space my family created. I braced for the looks of pity as I walked that aisle by myself. Then a shadow fell on the stone next to me. Someone had stepped up, blocking the bright morning sun. I turned, and I couldn't breathe. The string quartet started playing a powerful, almost haunting song. The music grew louder, floating over the perfect lawns and filling the clear mountain air. From behind the closed doors, the music sounded both beautiful and terrifying. That was my cue. I gripped my flowers so hard the stems felt cold and damp. My heart was hammering in my chest. For the last 2 days, I told myself I didn't care, that I didn't need their approval. But right there, seconds from the aisle, I almost cracked from the loneliness. I was ready to walk alone, ready to face 150 sets of pitying eyes on that long walk without my father. And then a shadow crossed the path. The scent of expensive cologne and leather cut through the smell of the gardenias. I turned and my heart just stopped. Arthur Vance was standing right beside me. He wasn't in his usual rugged blazer and riding boots. The real estate mogul was wearing a custom charcoal suit that fit him like a second skin. He just radiated this quiet, total power that commanded respect without a single word. He was 70, but he stood as tall and straight as an oak tree. "Arthur!" I whispered, my voice shaking. "What are you doing here?" He turned, his eyes crinkling with real warmth. "I told you, Clara, a father's job is to clear the way." He paused. "If yours refuses, it would be my greatest honor to step in." Then he offered me his arm. The gesture was simple, but it instantly grounded me. My panic just disappeared, replaced by a huge wave of gratitude. I took his arm, feeling the solid strength of the man who became my mentor when my own family cut me off. "Ready to show them what courage really looks like?" Arthur asked, his voice a low, steady rumble. I nodded, a real smile finally reaching my eyes. "I'm ready." The huge wooden doors swung open. Afternoon sun flooded the hall, blinding me for a second. Then the scene snapped into focus. The garden was breathtaking. Rows of white chairs on a perfect lawn were filled with guests, buzzing with excitement. At the end of the aisle, under an arch of white roses, stood Julian. He looked incredible in a tailored suit, his eyes locked on mine, promising forever. We took our first step. I felt the shift in the air immediately. The polite quiet of the crowd was shattered. It wasn't a whisper, it was a collective gasp that rippled through the guests like a current. My eyes went to the back row. My father, Richard, sat there, arms crossed, stiff with anger. He'd picked a seat near the exit, a smug look on his face, ready to see me walk in shame by myself. He wanted me to feel the full sting of his rejection. But instead, Richard saw me on the arm of Arthur Vance. I saw the exact moment my father realized who it was. His smug expression vanished, replaced by pure, raw panic. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking pale and sick. He actually shrank back in his seat, trying to become invisible. The man he'd dismissed as a has-been was the most powerful developer in the state, and he was proudly escorting the daughter Richard had disowned. Beside him, my mother Eleanor covered her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. She looked from me to Arthur, then to my sister Sophia, who sat bolt upright in her designer dress, her jaw just hanging open in disbelief. But the best reaction was from Marcus. Marcus, the arrogant developer who tried to sabotage our wedding venue. Marcus, who insulted my fiancé and showed off his family's money. Marcus, whose entire new project now depended on a stubborn old relic signing off on a critical land deal. His jaw literally dropped. He gripped his chair until his knuckles went white. His eyes shot from Arthur's face to mine as the horrible truth hit him. The relic he'd insulted, the very man his lawyers were trying to pressure, was walking his future sister-in-law down the aisle. In 30 seconds, my family's entire power structure turned to dust. Their social standing, their whole carefully built illusion of being superior, was shattered by the man beside me. Arthur leaned in, his voice a low rumble just for me. "Your brother-in-law looks like he's chewing on rocks," he murmured. "I bet he's rethinking his entire strategy for that land deal as we speak." A real joyful laugh burst out of me. It wasn't some delicate bridal laugh. It was full and real, lighting up my face. A camera flashed, capturing the moment. A bride, beaming with genuine happiness, walking beside an industry icon. We reached the altar. The music swelled triumphantly and then gently faded. Arthur turned to face Julian. The two men just looked at each other. There was no competition, no challenging glare. Just the quiet, shared respect of two men who knew the value of the woman standing between them. Arthur offered his hand. Julian took it, their handshake firm. "Look after her, Julian," Arthur said, his voice clear enough for the front rows to hear. "She's remarkable." "I will, sir," Julian answered, his eyes locked on mine. "Always." Arthur then stepped back and took a seat in the front row, in the chair reserved for the father of the bride. He sat there, a silent, protective force. I turned to Julian, placing my hands in his. His warm grip steadied me. The officiant began speaking of love and commitment, but the rest of the world just faded away. I didn't look back at the last row. I didn't need to see my parents to know they were there, stunned by how badly they had miscalculated. Their whole lives were a house of cards, and the wind was picking up. We said our vows under the big Colorado sky. The words felt deeper, more real, because of everything we'd faced. When Julian slid the gold ring onto my finger, it felt cool and final. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the officiant declared. "You may kiss the bride." Julian leaned in, and his kiss was gentle, solid, and completely reassuring. The guests erupted into cheers. We turned to face them. Our hands linked and walked back up the aisle as the new Mr. and Mrs. Sterling. As we passed the last row, I kept my gaze forward on the sunlit gardens. I didn't give Richard, Eleanor, Sophia, or Marcus a single look. They weren't the main characters in my story anymore. They were just people in the cheap seats, watching a future they had no part of. The ceremony was perfect, but as everyone headed for the cocktail hour, the real drama was just getting started. My family came expecting to make a quiet escape. They were about to learn that leaving wasn't an option, and that the price for their pride was due. The reception was under a huge tent on the lawn, glowing with hundreds of lanterns. Round tables with white cloths surrounded the dance floor, and that seating chart was no accident. It was a map of my new world. My parents, Sophia and Marcus, found their seats at table 19. It was shoved in the absolute furthest corner of the tent, right next to the swinging kitchen doors. Every time a server burst through with a tray of food, the door would just miss the back of Richard's chair. For my whole life, my family put me on the outside. Now they were getting a taste of that same cold shoulder. I sat at the head table with Julian, surrounded by his family, local officials, and Arthur Vance. From where I sat, I watched the Donovan family try to look composed. My mother nervously poked at her food, her eyes scanning the room. Sophia sat stiffly, not touching her wine, her fancy dress lost in the shadows. But Preston couldn't sit still. His real estate project was losing money fast. His investors were getting cold feet, and the one man who could save him was sitting just 50 feet away. Preston watched Harrison Caldwell get up and walk to the mahogany bar. To a desperate man, a billionaire buying scotch looks like a life raft. Preston straightened his tie, left his wife, and navigated the crowded tables. He walked up to the bar with a big fake smile, faking the confidence of someone who belonged in elite circles. He ordered a bourbon, sliding right into Harrison's space. "Preston Hayes. My wife is Isabella. I'm Penelope's brother-in-law. I was hoping to talk to you about that commercial lot on the west side. We have an opportunity that could be very good for both of us." Harrison didn't take his hand. He just stared at Preston like he was a stain on a clean window. Before Harrison could even answer, a glass clinked softly on the bar top. Maya Thorne had moved between them without making a sound. She wore an emerald dress like armor. "Mr. Hayes won't be talking business tonight, Harrison," Maya said, her voice like silk, giving the older man a warm look. "He has plenty to worry about with his current debts." Preston frowned and let his hand drop. "Excuse me, but this is a private discussion." Maya turned to him, her expression calm, cool, and completely devastating. "We met once before at the Bistro Preston. My name is Maya Thorne. What I failed to mention then was my official title. I'm the lead attorney for Thorne Enterprises." Preston just blinked, the name not connecting for a second, and then all the colour vanished from his face. Thorne Enterprises was the lender holding all the bad debt for his entire Bozeman project. They owned him. "We own your debt, Preston. Every single penny. And as of last night, you were in breach of your loan agreements." Preston swallowed hard, feeling his chest tighten. "Your firm, you work for the main company?" "I do more than work for them," Maya corrected him gently. It's a family business. My brother is the CEO. Preston's eyes went wide with pure terror. He glanced frantically across the tent and saw him at the head table, where Elias was laughing with my old college friends. The man Preston had mocked, the man he called a broke mountain guide, was the CEO who held his entire financial life in his hands. Elias was not a guide. He ran the trust that owned the very mountain they were standing on. Foreclosure starts Monday morning, Maya told him. I'd enjoy that open bar while you still can. Preston stumbled back, bumping into a waiter and shaking a tray of glasses. Maya just sipped her sparkling water and returned to her table, leaving him breathless by the ice sculpture. A sharp ring cut through the tent as a spoon hit a crystal glass. The chatter died. Harrison was at the main table, mic in hand. The room fell silent, waiting for the giant to speak. "Weddings are about new beginnings," Harrison began, his voice easily filling the space. "Most of you see Penelope and you see a beautiful bride. I see the most brilliant scientific mind in this entire state." He let that hang in the air. He didn't sound like a hero. He sounded like a CEO stating a fact. For the past 6 months, Penelope and I have been operating under a strict non-disclosure agreement, Harrison continued. Tonight that ends. My company, Caldwell Hospitality, searched for 2 years for a signature botanical formula for our luxury spas worldwide. We tested products from Paris to Tokyo. The only one that met our standard was created in a small greenhouse right here in Bozeman. I glanced at my parents' table. Hector was leaning forward, his face a perfect mask of confusion. 6 months ago, Harrison announced, his voice booming with pride, Penelope signed a $5 million exclusive supply contract with my company. She built this herself. She isn't just a creator, she's a self-made leader in her industry. So please raise your glasses to Mrs. Thorne. The entire tent just erupted. 150 people were on their feet, clapping and cheering. That sound was a tidal wave of approval, washing away years of feeling invisible. Through the noise, I met my father's eyes. Hector Ramirez was still in his chair. The truth was hitting him, and you could see his face just crumble. The daughter he'd called a weed picker, the daughter he refused to walk down the aisle, was now a multi-millionaire, respected by the most powerful man he knew. He'd bet his family's future on a leased sports car, tossing aside a real diamond to grab a piece of broken glass. Isabella couldn't stand it. The applause felt like a physical assault. She shot up, her chair screaming against the dance floor. She grabbed her designer bag and stormed toward the exit, snatching Preston's arm on the way, and dragging her shocked husband out into the cold Montana air. On Monday morning, I was packing for our honeymoon in Belize. The air in our new house was crisp, smelling of fresh coffee and coming rain. Liam was at the kitchen counter, scrolling through emails before we left for the airport. We were just enjoying the quiet of our new life, totally unaware a hurricane was ripping through my family on the other side of town. I had to piece together the events later, from public records and the local rumour mill. At 8 a.m, Mark arrived at his sterile office. His head was pounding after a weekend of absolute humiliation. He slumped into his chair, desperate for a plan. A heavy, cream-coloured envelope sat on his keyboard. The return address was Summit Ventures. Mark ripped it open, bracing for a financial dispute. Inside was a single sheet of paper. It was a final, unconditional rejection of his zoning proposal. The legal wording was vicious. The board cited a complete lack of integrity and questionable character as the reason for several ties, effective immediately. His entire development project was officially dead. Before the paper even settled on his desk, his email pinged. It was an alert from Apex Holdings' legal team. A notice of default. The loans keeping his business afloat were being called in. Every single one. He had 30 days to produce millions of dollars he simply didn't have. His glass-walled office suddenly felt like a fishbowl. Across town, my sister Sophie was in her own bubble, fighting a losing battle at an upscale party planner's office. She was trying to soothe her bruised ego by staging an event that would eclipse my wedding. She approved imported orchids and a champagne tower. The planner slid the final estimate across the desk. A huge deposit was due now to secure everything. Sophie produced her platinum card with a practiced, confident flick of her wrist. The event planner swiped it, declined. Sophie let out a tight laugh, blaming it on a bank error. She tried another card, declined again. Her smile began to look pasted on. She dug in her luxury handbag for Mark's primary business card. The planner ran it. The small screen flashed a bright, brutal red. Confiscate card. The planner slid the machine back. She said the vendors needed payment by noon, or every booking would be cancelled. Sophie stumbled into the hall, her hands shaking as she tried to call Mark. The call went directly to his voicemail. In less than an hour, the planner had notified the caterer, the florist, and the band. The grand gala was officially cancelled. In a small town like Aspen Falls, news like that travels faster than it takes to get to your car. Her social currency had just completely vanished. The final blow landed in a quiet suburban house. Arthur and Eleanor sat in their armchairs, their tea forgotten and cold. The silence in the living room was thick, broken only by a ticking clock. Arthur's pride was stung, but he was certain Mark was a genius who'd just hit a minor speed bump. He was sure Mark would bounce back and keep funding their comfortable lifestyle. Then their landline rang. It was Sophie. Her voice was thin and hysterical as she explained the frozen accounts and the cancelled party. Arthur adopted a tone of calm authority. He told her not to worry, promising he'd wire her money from his and Eleanor's home equity line to fix it. He hung up, walked to his study, and logged into his online bank account. He navigated to their property records, expecting to see a lifetime of equity waiting. He froze. He just stared at the screen. The numbers made no sense. There was a huge negative balance on their home. A second mortgage had wiped out every dime. Arthur clicked into the loan documents, his hands beginning to tremble. The signature date was a Tuesday night, about 8 months ago. Arthur remembered it clearly. Mark had come over with a leather briefcase and a very expensive bottle of wine. He'd laid out a thick stack of papers, saying he was setting up a special family trust just for them. Mark said this trust would handle their country club dues, Eleanor's car lease, and their property taxes automatically. He complimented their financial savvy, poured more wine, and just pointed to the signature lines, rushing them to lock in a great rate. They signed every page, no lawyer present, placing complete faith in their perfect son-in-law. The truth was burning a hole in the monitor. Marcus wasn't bankrolling their lifestyle with his own success. He had secretly leveraged their home as collateral for his own failing business. The leased cars, the club membership, the expensive dinners they were paying for it all with debt against their own house. He was giving them an allowance from their own money to keep them quiet and loyal to Chloe. When Eleanor came in, she saw her husband's face, suddenly grey and hollow. Arthur just turned the laptop toward her. The reality hit them both like a punch. They had traded their loyal daughter for a con man who was actively stealing their home. The relationship they thought was a lifeline to luxury was actually a noose, and Marcus had just kicked the chair out from under them. They had nothing. Their savings were gone. Their standing in the community was ruined, and their house was about to be seized. Arthur fumbled for his phone, his hand shaking, his breathing shallow. He knew only one person in the state who had the influence to stop this nightmare. He scrolled through his contacts, landed on my name, and prepared to make the call that would set an even bigger blaze. That Tuesday morning, the mountain light was crisp and beautiful, making long shadows across our new floors. Julian and I were in our bedroom, packing for a 2-week honeymoon at a private resort in Bali. I was folding a sundress, feeling truly happy for what felt like the first time ever. The wedding was done. The truth was out. And for the first time in my 29 years, I felt free from the crushing weight of my family's expectations. Then my phone started to vibrate on the nightstand. It was a hard, angry buzz that just kept going. It sounded like an alarm. I put down the dress and walked over to look. The screen was a blur of notifications, scrolling by too fast to read. Dozens of missed calls, voicemails, and urgent texts. Every single one was from my family, my father Arthur, my mother Eleanor, my sister Chloe. I unlocked the phone and went to my voicemail. 5 new messages from my father in just the last half hour. I hit play on the first one and put it on speaker. Clara, my father's voice cracked, completely stripped of its usual power. He sounded small, desperate, and 20 years older than yesterday. Clara, please. You have to pick up the phone. We are in terrible, terrible trouble. Marcus lied to us. He took out a second mortgage on our house. The bank just sent the foreclosure notice. They're going to take everything. I just stood there, frozen while his words hung in the air. He stopped, catching his breath. I know Julian S. Company holds the debt. I know he says the CEO. Go to him, Clara. You have to ask him for mercy. We're really going to lose the house. We have nowhere else to go. Call me. The message ended. Then, a text from my mother. Clara Vance, why didn't you warn us? We're so proud of you, but we really need your help. Marcus's deal collapsed and he's taking us down with him. Your father's having chest pains from the stress. Tell Julian to stop the foreclosure. We are your family. Family helps family. I had to read it 3 times just to process it. No apology for ditching me at my own wedding. No regrets about skipping my final dress fitting. Not a single word about the pain they caused by choosing Chloe's phony engagement party over my actual wedding. Instead, just the stunning arrogance of their demand. They were sinking in a mess they created, and just expected me to rescue them. They thought the daughter they'd spent a lifetime ignoring would just call up her tech billionaire husband and make him fix it all. They really thought they still had some power over me. They thought my love was a bank they could just withdraw from whenever Marcus's fake fortune vanished. Then a text from Chloe. Clara, Marcus is having a complete meltdown. His investors backed out. You need to make Julian fix this. We're family. Don't you dare let this happen to me. She wasn't asking for my help. She was blaming me for her husband's failure. She was furious that her perfect life was crumbling, that she wasn't the golden child with a wealthy fiancé anymore. And she honestly expected me to put her right back on the pedestal she just fell from. Julian walked in right then, holding our passports. He stopped in the doorway, taking it all in. He saw my tension, the phone lit up in my hand, and the cold, hard look on my face. He put the passports on the dresser and came over to me. He didn't ask what was wrong. He already knew. The legal team at his company, Nexus Dynamics, had made the margin calls at 9 a.m. sharp. The fallout was happening right on schedule. They're falling apart, Julian said quietly, his voice both detached and incredibly gentle. Yes, I replied, my voice shockingly firm. Marcus used their house as collateral for his deal. They just got the notice. And now they're begging for mercy, Julian said, his eyes fixed on mine. He was letting me take the lead. He was giving me the power to decide the fate of the people who had absolutely broken my heart. What do you want to do? Julian asked. I can stop it. I can even restructure their loan. It's your call, Clara. Whatever you need to feel okay, I'll make it happen. I looked down at my phone. My parents were about to be homeless. My sister was facing total humiliation. My father, who refused to walk me down the aisle so he wouldn't upset Chloe, was now begging for a handout from the man he once made fun of. I thought of all those school plays with empty seats, my cancelled dress fitting, standing alone at the altar, facing everyone without my dad. I looked up at Julian. Years of guilt just melted away, replaced by a cold, clear calm. Let them sink, I said. Julian gave a short, firm nod, accepting my choice without any hesitation. He wasn't judging me. He knew mercy has to be earned, and my family hadn't shown a single shred of remorse. I held down the power button on my phone. The screen prompted me to slide to power off. I slid my thumb over the glass. The screen went dark. The constant stream of desperate messages was finally over. I tossed the phone in my carry-on bag and zipped it shut. We drove to the Denver airport in a quiet, comfortable silence. We boarded the plane, leaving the bitter Colorado winter behind. As we flew towards Bali, I watched the world I was escaping shrink until it disappeared completely. Back in Denver, the Davies family was stuck in a nightmare they built themselves. My father was calling a phone that was now turned off. My mother was crying over a house that was no longer hers. Chloe was in some tiny, rented apartment, staring at a husband whose entire life was a house of cards. They were all scrambling for a way out, having no idea that I'd already taken it and locked the door behind me. Their safety net was gone, and it had snapped back and wiped them all out. While they sifted through the wreckage of their lives, Julian and I were flying to a jungle paradise to enjoy a victory we both deserved. But this was far from over. Running away from your family doesn't mean the drama is over. A locked door only works until you have to go back and face who's on the other side. And I knew they would be waiting for me when I got back. The air in Bali was warm and smelled like flowers a world away from the cold, thin air of Colorado. We were in a private villa deep in the rainforest where the only sounds were the ocean and the birds. There was no phone signal, no Wi-Fi. The isolation was total, and for the first couple of days it was terrifying. For 29 years, my entire body had been wired for constant anxiety. I was raised to be ready for the next family disaster, the next emotional test to prove if I was worthy of their love or was just in the way. My defense was always to just give in. I made myself smaller, quieter, and easy to please, hoping that if I asked for nothing, they might finally accept me. Sitting on our villa balcony, watching the sunset, I could still feel the phantom vibration of my phone in my bag. The world was finally quiet, but my mind was screaming. The guilt you feel for finally standing up for yourself is a heavy, suffocating thing. I kept picturing my father, the man who taught me to ride a bike, opening that foreclosure notice. I imagined my mother packing her memories into boxes. I was safe in a luxury resort with the man I love, but that deep-seated need to fix their problems was like an undertow, trying to pull me back in. Then Julian walked out onto the balcony, holding 2 glasses of mango juice. He looked relaxed in linen pants and a soft shirt. The ruthless CEO who had just destroyed my brother-in-law's world was gone, replaced by the calm, steady man I had married. He set the drinks down and sat with me. He didn't ask what I was thinking. He didn't try to force me to be happy. He just sat there with me in the quiet, his presence a solid and comforting anchor. "You're waiting for the other shoe to drop," Julian said softly, watching a bird fly past. "I'm waiting for the guilt to stop," I admitted, my voice barely a whisper over the waves. "I keep thinking about their house, the one I grew up in. I know they brought this on themselves. I know Marcus is a complete fraud. But my parents are still losing everything, and I could have stopped it. But I chose not to." Julian turned to face me. He didn't offer some cheap comfort or tell me they got what they deserved. He gave me something real. "Peace isn't about avoiding your problems, Clara," he said, his voice low and firm. "Peace is about having boundaries that hold up. You've spent your entire life believing love was conditional. You thought you had to earn your place by just taking their bad behavior. What you're feeling right now isn't guilt. It's grief. You're grieving the family you were supposed to have, but never got." I stared down at Glass. He was right. The ache in my chest wasn't about wanting to rescue them. It was the crushing realization that even if I did rescue them, nothing would change. If I sent the money, if I paid off the house, they wouldn't suddenly start to respect me. They wouldn't apologize for abandoning me at my wedding. They would just see my money as their new crutch, replacing Marcus's lies with my own success. Our relationship wouldn't heal. It would just reset. "They're going to expect you to fix this the moment we're back," Julian said, his gaze steady on mine. "They'll use your history together to try and tear down the walls you just put up. You have to decide right now who you're going to be when they call. Are you the daughter who still craves their approval, or are you the woman who built her own world?" The question just hung in the heavy, humid air. I looked down at my own hands. They were a botanist's hands, strong, capable, used to making things grow. I had built a $5 million business from nothing. I had earned the respect of a tech billionaire using nothing but my own talent. I had married a man who saw me, all of me, and loved me for it. I'd spent my life tending my own garden while my family was obsessed with flowers that were already dying. I had survived my own drought. I wasn't going to apologize for finally thriving. I'm the woman who built an empire, I said. The words felt foreign, but saying them made them real solid. Elias gave me a slow, true smile that reached his eyes. Yes, you are. The change in me was permanent. For the next 10 days, the phantom buzz of my phone just stopped. The urge to turn it on to check my messages, it just vanished. I swam in the ocean, hiked in the jungle, and spent hours talking with Elias about our new life in Montana. I was done blaming myself for my parents' choices. I finally accepted you can't save people who are determined to drown. Their choices belong to them, and so did the consequences. I wasn't that little girl anymore, begging for a spot at their table. I had built my own table, and I was the one who decided who sat there. On our last honeymoon day, I packed my wedding dress in the suitcase. I fished my phone from the bottom of my bag. It felt cold and heavy in my hand. I knew the moment I powered it on, my screen would explode. Desperate calls, angry texts, frantic updates about Preston's collapsing company. I didn't turn it on, I just slid it into my carry-on, leaving the screen dark. I would deal with it all when we landed in Bozeman, on my time, on my terms, and just like that we were on the jet, back towards the crisp Montana air. I watched the lush green jungle shrink below me. I was returning to the mountains as someone new. The fragile girl who needed her father's approval had died days before my wedding. The woman flying home was strong, focused, and knew exactly what she was worth. But as our plane angled north toward Bozeman, a harsh dose of reality hit me. Ignoring the family drama is easy when there's an ocean between you. The true test of my new boundaries was waiting for me at home. My family was desperate, cornered, and had no pride left. A trapped animal will always try to smash through a fence before it accepts that it's caged. I knew they wouldn't just be calling. They were coming to start a war on the very ground I had fought so hard to claim. The air inside my new botanical lab was perfectly still, smelling of lavender and fresh earth. It was Tuesday afternoon, 2 weeks after my wedding, and I was in my glass-walled lab inspecting a massive shipment for Caldwell Hospitality. Business was booming, all thanks to that $5 million contract that turned my little greenhouse into a world-class facility. Elias was at a conference table nearby, signing the last of the paperwork for our new house. Across from him was Maya Thorne, who had just flown in to manage the final stage of a major bank takeover. Everything was calm, organized, and moving forward. That piece shattered the second the main lobby doors slammed open. I glanced up from my tablet as shouting echoed through the open space. My receptionist, Chloe, was backing away from her desk. Her hands raised, trying to de-escalate, but charging right past her, violating every security protocol, was the Ramirez family. Hector led the charge, his face red, wearing a suit that suddenly looked 2 sizes too big. Vivian was right behind him, her face a mask of pure fury and terror. Isabella was next, clutching a designer coat and dragging a stunned-looking Preston by the arm. They looked utterly destroyed. They looked like people who had spent the last 2 weeks watching their entire world burn to the ground and were now here to face the one person they thought could save them. I didn't run. I didn't call for security. I just set down my tablet, straightened my white lab coat, and walked out to meet them. Elias and Maya were on their feet in an instant, flanking me like a silent, powerful honor guard. "Clara!" Hector shouted, his voice cracking as he saw me. "Tell this woman to move. We're your family. We don't need an appointment." "Actually, Hector, you do," I answered. My voice was calm, even, carrying easily across the cavernous lobby. "You bypassed security. You are now trespassing on my property." "Trespassing?" Vivian shrieked, clutching her pearls in a dramatic performance. "We are your parents! This is an emergency, Clara! We've been calling you for weeks! Why is your phone off?" Preston finally yanked his arm free from Isabella. He looked physically ill. The smug developer who mocked Elias's boots was gone. In his place was a man about to lose absolutely everything. He stumbled forward, his eyes darting past me, his terrified gaze landing squarely on Elias. "Ilias, please!" Preston begged, his voice shaking. "You have to stop the foreclosure, the construction site, the loan. It's all connected. If you call in that loan, I'm ruined. I'm your brother-in-law. You can't do this to me. Elias just stared at Preston with the cold, impartial gaze of a CEO assessing a bad investment. He didn't move. He didn't even raise his voice. I'm not your brother-in-law, Preston, Elias said quietly. I'm the CEO of Thorn Enterprises. You sold out our family. You lied straight to my face. This is on you because you got caught, Hector, not because you feel a shred of guilt. That's how he saw it, just another business deal that went sour. He looked at me, his eyes pleading for a weakness that no longer existed. How can you say family is nothing? Clara, come on. We have to work together. We can fix all this if we just stay strong. He actually reached for my hand. Strong? I thought, my voice low but sharp. Don't you dare lecture me about family to get what you want. The nerve was breathtaking. He just stood there, a dethroned king standing in his own ruins. He aimed a shaky finger right at me. Clara, this has gone far enough. You're acting like a spoiled brat who can't get over a little grudge. You will tell your husband to stop this. You owe us. We gave you everything. You are not going to let us lose our home because you're having a little temper tantrum over a wedding. He said it with such authority, as if he still had that lifelong emotional power over me. He genuinely believed he could command me, and I would simply obey. I looked at the four of them, standing in the lobby of my company. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. The rage I'd carried for years had finally cooled into something solid and clear. I turned to Maya. The portfolio, please. Maya opened her briefcase, pulling out a thick black binder. Maya handed me the tablet with a subtle, knowing nod. I turned it on. The screen glowed with perfect copies of files from the family cloud account, I discovered. I chose a single document and walked toward Hector. I didn't just give it to him. I held it flat in front of his face, making him see it. That is a screenshot of the text you sent me the night before my company's big funding pitch, I said, my voice echoing in the now silent lobby. The one where you said, I'm not going. Your sister thinks it looks desperate. You sabotaged my career to protect her ego, Hector. That wasn't business. That was betrayal. Hector stared at the screen, his jaw hanging slack, completely lost for words. I swiped on the tablet to a bank statement. I walked over to Vivian, who looked like she wanted the floor to swallow her whole, and held it up. This is the wire transfer confirmation, I announced, locking my eyes on my mother's horrified face, showing Preston trying to bribe a city planner with $10,000 to reject my building permit. He tried to kill my dream so Isabella could build a ridiculous boutique on the land. And you, Vivian, you skipped my final city board presentation to help her pick out lighting for it. Vivian made a small, strangled sound, her hand flying to her throat. I turned to Isabella. I swiped to a crisp, geotagged photograph. I held the tablet up so she could see her own smiling face staring back at her. This is the photo you posted the night of my big presentation, I said, my voice dangerously calm. The presentation my entire family bailed on. You were at the Wellington Yacht Club, toasting Preston's new venture with expensive champagne. Your caption read, celebrating with the people who actually matter. Isabella looked at the photo, her fake tears drying up as she realized I had receipts for all of it. I stepped back, standing shoulder to shoulder with Elias and Maya. I looked at the broken, panicked people who called themselves my family. You came here talking about loyalty, Hector, I said, my voice ringing with absolute finality. But loyalty is something you have to earn. You gave all of your loyalty to Preston. He bought you with a country club pass and a leased car. You gave him power of attorney over your entire retirement account. You let him gamble with your whole life, and you traded your own daughter for a cheap con artist. I glanced at Preston, who was sweating through his expensive suit and staring at the floor. Elias isn't some broke history professor, Preston, I said, delivering the final fatal blow. His firm is the main creditor that owns your entire fund. They hold all your bad debt, and they own the bank that's foreclosing on your house. My husband's team finished acquiring that bank this morning. Your empire didn't just collapse. We simply stopped propping up the illusion. The launch hall went dead silent. The Ashworth family name was built on a lie of perfect reputation, and I just blew it to pieces. They stood there in the wreckage, completely naked to the world. My father, Richard, stared at me, his eyes begging for a lifeline. "Ava, please, what do we do?" I looked past him, a hollow space where my feelings used to be. The girl who would have cleaned up his mess was dead. "You will leave my launch event now," I said, my voice perfectly level, "and you will handle this alone." I turned to my husband, Leo. "Get security. Get them out of this building. If they come back, I want them charged with trespassing." I didn't wait to see them leave. I walked away from them, heading toward the product demos with Leo. The huge glass doors of the convention hall closed behind us, cutting off the scene. But the fallout from that public takedown was just starting to spread. The social order of Sterling Hills was about to be rewritten, and my family would have nowhere to hide. Leo gave a small, almost invisible signal. 2 men in dark suits appeared from a hallway, their expressions like stone. They didn't need to speak. Their presence was enough to show that the bridge I just burned was gone for good. My father looked at the security team, then his eyes shot back to me. The entitlement that brought him here had evaporated, leaving only a pathetic, empty shock. He'd always believed being Dad was a free pass to do whatever he wanted. He was finally discovering, in front of everyone, that his membership had expired. My mother gripped his arm, her nails digging into his suit jacket. "Richard?" "Let's go," she hissed, her voice shaking. The performance was done. There was no one to manipulate, no sympathy to be found. My sister, Chloe, wouldn't meet my gaze. She just stared at the polished floor, looking small and defeated in her designer dress. Her husband, Marcus, stumbled as they headed for the exit, a man completely adrift. Leo came to my side, a calm and solid anchor. He adjusted his tie, his focus already turning back to our investors and guests. That fight was done, but the real war had just begun. In a closed-off town like Sterling Hills, gossip is currency. The city's entire social scene reeled from the vacuum left by my father's public disgrace. By Monday morning, the fraud investigation into Marcus's investment firm was headline news. This wasn't a quiet little problem. It was a 5-alarm fire. The result was their immediate and brutal exile from the high society they treasured. The country club, a place that cared more about appearances than ethics, didn't bother waiting for charges. My parents' membership was suspended that same day for a supposed conduct violation. But the real reason was simple. The Ashworth family's power was gone, and my parents were no longer useful pieces on the social chessboard. Chloe had her own harsh landing. The charity board she ran politely asked her to step down immediately. All the wealthy women who adored her fundraisers suddenly stopped answering her texts. Her friendships, built on status and whispers, vanished the moment the Ashworth name was poison. The knockout punch came when the bank took back Marcus's leased sports car and their huge rented house in a gated community. Chloe, the sister who once mocked my small condo and my obsessive work ethic, was now packing her life into cardboard boxes. She and Marcus had to move into a shabby 2-bedroom apartment across town. She was living the very paycheck-to-paycheck panic she always thought was beneath her. And she was doing it alone, because our parents were drowning in their own financial disaster. They were losing their home to foreclosure, with bank warnings stacking up on their kitchen counter as proof. The money they thought made them safe was now the anchor pulling them down. Maybe 3 weeks after the launch, a thick envelope landed on my desk. It had "personal" written on the front. I sat at my desk, looking at my father's handwriting. It was still elegant but shaky now, missing its usual confidence. I ripped it open. Inside was a 3-page letter, a chaotic, desperate plea for a bailout. Richard wrote about his supposed sacrifices, trying to use guilt and nostalgia to undo what he'd done. He detailed the coming foreclosure, the public humiliation, and how it was destroying my mother's health. He presented himself and my mother as blameless victims of Marcus's elaborate con. There was no apology for trying to ruin me, not a word about the years of undermining my work or trying to sabotage my business. The letter was nothing but a long, pathetic story designed to get me to rescue them. He wanted a loan, a massive sum to stop the foreclosure. He promised to repay every cent, a hollow vow from a man who had nothing left. I read every word. I felt no rage, no joy, not even the familiar guilt that had followed me my whole life. There was just a profound, silent void. I put the letter on my desk. I wasn't going to write back and list all his lies. He didn't deserve an explanation. We were done talking. I opened my desk drawer, pulled out a thick ivory noticard and a fine-tipped pen. I remembered being a kid, winning a regional coding prize, and my father dismissing it as a nice little hobby. I remembered my own family trying to derail my wedding. I remembered a lifetime spent chasing an approval that was never on offer. I put the pen to the paper. I wrote no salutation. I didn't sign it. I wrote a single, clean sentence. I hope you find the peace you never offered me. I folded the card, put it in a plain envelope, and addressed it to their house, the one the bank was about to own. There was no check inside, no offer of any kind. I went to the front office and gave the letter to my assistant to include with the afternoon mail. I watched the courier leave with it and felt a final lock click shut inside me. The wall was finished. I had severed the very last tie to the Ashworth family. But as I walked back to my office, ready to focus on a new project, my phone lit up. A text from Ben, our lawyer. He was reviewing the final audit of Marcus's failed firm, and he found it a secret account, hidden in the books, filled with cash Marcus had diverted before filing for bankruptcy. The text was brief, but it was a bomb. Marcus wasn't just incompetent. He was a federal criminal, and he had listed my parents as the primary guarantors on the fraudulent account. Their financial collapse was now a crime scene, and the Ashworths were at the centre of it. The following Thursday, a weird, sharp frost hit Sterling Hills, a perfect mirror for the cold truth settling over my parents' house. The bank finalised the foreclosure. They had a firm, non-negotiable deadline to be out. Richard Ashworth, a man whose entire self-worth was tied to his address and his club membership, was now facing the grim reality of being poor. The refrigerator was almost empty. My mother cried all morning while polishing silver platters to sell. Their luxury car had been repossessed overnight. My father needed to buy food, but his bank account was frozen, tangled in the investigation into Marcus' crimes. He was at his large desk, sifting through junk mail for a forgotten check or a coupon. In the back of a drawer, buried under overdue bills, he found a sealed envelope. He pulled it out. It was postmarked 2 months ago, addressed to him in my script. He tore it open, his hands shaking a little. Inside was the check I'd sent from my office repaying the condescending $500 loan he gave me years ago. Richard just stared at it. For a man who used to charge $1,000 lunches to an expense account, $500 was an insult. But today it was food for the week, gas money to beg a bank manager for a loan, and a brief escape from the reality of being broke. He didn't think twice about the ethics of taking money from the daughter he tried to destroy. He ignored the note in the memo line, paid in full. All his arrogance had been ground down by pure, raw desperation. He took his keys, climbed into their old sedan, the one car that they actually owned, and drove to the bank. The lobby was nearly empty. Richard waited in line, holding the check, his gaze nervously scanning the room. He felt phantom eyes on him, sure that everyone here knew he was financially ruined. When a teller was free, he approached the counter, sliding the check across the granite. "I need to cash this, please," Robert said, his voice a pale shadow of its old authority. The teller, a young guy with a polite smile, took it. He glanced at the account name, then began typing numbers into his computer. Robert stared at the screen, holding his breath, already budgeting the money for groceries. The teller stopped. He frowned and typed something else. He looked at the check again, then back at his screen. "Mr. Miller, I'm very sorry," the teller said, his voice low and sympathetic. "I'm afraid I can't cash this." A wave of icy dread washed over Robert. "Why not? Is the account empty?" "I know for a fact my daughter runs a very successful company. The money is there." "Oh, the funds are there, sir," the teller confirmed, "but the account holder put a stop payment order on this check." "A stop payment?" Robert repeated, his voice starting to crack. "When did she do that?" The teller checked his notes. The order was placed at 9:15 a.m. on August 10th. August 10th. The date hit Robert like a fist to the gut. That was the morning of my wedding. The exact moment I was reading a text from my mother saying they'd sit in the back to stand with my sister. I hadn't forgotten about the check at all. I had cancelled it with cold, deliberate precision, making sure that financial tie was cut for good before I walked down the aisle. Robert just stood there at the counter, the brutal truth of his choices finally crashing down on him. He had chosen Marcus's empty promises over my loyalty, and now all he held was a worthless piece of paper. He took the voided check, his hands shaking, and walked out into the cold Seattle drizzle with nothing. While Robert was facing an empty bank account, Marcus was dealing with a very public humiliation. The bankruptcy had stripped him of every asset, his tech industry status, and whatever dignity he had left. To pay off a tiny piece of his massive debts and to avoid a deeper federal probe into the shell companies I'd discovered, the court ordered Marcus to get a steady job immediately. The judge ruled that a large portion of his income would be garnished and sent right to his creditors, but Marcus's biggest problem was his own reputation. The Seattle tech scene is a small, tight-knit world. Everybody knew about his spectacular collapse and his shady business practices. No legitimate company would touch a guy who had almost bankrupted his own co-founder's family. He applied for senior developer jobs, consulting gigs, anything. All he got back was silence and rejection. With the court's deadline closing in, Marcus had no choice but to take a low-wage job from a temp agency. He desperately needed a paycheck, no matter how degrading the work was. So on a cold, damp Tuesday, Marcus reported to a huge logistics warehouse on the industrial side of Tacoma. He wasn't in an expensive sweatshirt anymore. He wore a bright yellow safety vest, scuffed work boots, and a generic company hat. They made him a package scanner, a soul-crushing, minimum-wage job that meant standing for 8 hours, pointing a scanner at barcodes and making sure boxes got to the right conveyor belt. Marcus clocked in, avoiding eye contact, knowing some workers probably remembered him driving a brand-new Rivian. He grabbed his scanner and walked onto the chilly warehouse floor, his ego shattered by the kind of manual labor he used to ridicule. A couple hours into his shift, his soft hands already going raw in his cheap gloves, while sorting pallets, he saw a line of black sedans pulling up to the main office. Marcus recognized those cars immediately. They were the same type that appeared at the hotel on my wedding day. The first car stopped at the executive entrance. The driver's door opened and Liam stepped out. He was in a perfectly tailored navy overcoat, looking every bit the architectural giant he was. A few of his partners followed him, carrying large, rolled-up blueprints. Marcus froze, and his scanner clattered to the concrete. He hadn't even bothered to check who owned the warehouse. He just took the job because he was desperate. This giant distribution center, the newest and largest in the state, was a flagship project for Summit Architecture. Liam, the man Marcus had dismissed as a glorified sketch artist, wasn't just my husband. Liam was the lead architect for this entire project. His firm was signing Marcus's pathetic little paycheck. For all practical purposes, Liam was his boss. Liam walked to the main office, discussing loading bay designs with the site manager. He wasn't looking for Marcus. He hadn't planned this moment to gloat. He was just moving across the property with an easy authority, checking on the real-world progress of his firm's design. As Liam passed the sorting station, his eyes did a quick scan of the area. He saw Marcus standing there in his yellow vest, looking pathetic and small. Liam didn't even slow down. He didn't smile, and he didn't offer a single sarcastic word. He just gave Marcus a brief, impersonal nod, the kind a CEO gives a janitor he passes in the hall, and kept on walking. That complete and utter indifference was 1,000 times more brutal than any insult. Marcus just stood there on the cold floor, watching the man he once ridiculed command the very universe he had lost. The karma was vicious, swift, and perfectly balanced. The Miller family and Marcus were drowning in the mess they created, while Liam and I were just starting our new life. but getting over a toxic family is more than watching them fall. The final piece is learning to live in the quiet space they used to take up, and building boundaries so strong they can't ever get back in to hurt you. 6 months went by, and the grey drizzle of a Pacific Northwest winter finally gave way to the vibrant green of spring. I was standing on a beautiful 10-acre piece of land we had found on Bainbridge Island. The property sloped down to the water, giving us a perfect, clear view of the Seattle skyline across the Puget Sound. This was the farmhouse Amelia and I had bought. It was our sanctuary, a life we were building from the ground up, miles from the city's hollow glamour. The soil felt rich beneath my boots, smelling of rain and cedar. Before me were neat rows of vegetable beds, their first green shoots just pushing through the dark earth. The air was crisp, clean, and felt like honest work. I moved between the beds, my fingers tracing the lines in the soil. These weren't delicate flowers in some fancy display. They were seeds, planted deep, meant to withstand a drought and grow strong. And in a way, they were me. I reached the edge of the garden where an old stone fence marked our land. I put my hands on the weathered stone, looking back toward the glittering skyline, and a profound quiet settled deep in my bones. The constant buzzing of my phone was gone. That tight wire of anxiety of waiting for the next family crisis call had finally snapped. In the 6 months since I emailed that final, polite goodbye to my parents, the silence from them was total. I still heard whispers through the city's gossip network, but it was like hearing news about people I used to know. The bank finally took their penthouse back in March. My parents had to lease a cramped condo miles from the high society circles they once worshipped. My father, with no other options, swallowed his pride and took a junior sales job at a car dealership, just for a paycheck and insurance. Their marriage, which was built on charity galas and press releases, crumbled completely under the financial strain. The divorce was fast, ugly, and humiliatingly public. My father's perfect image was a lie, and now he was desperately trying to salvage what little reputation he had left. It was a daily headline of his spectacular failure. I was eating, sleeping, and pouring all my energy into our baby, creating a life that was completely off their map. I once believed setting a boundary meant you had to build a fortress, a defense mechanism designed to lock yourself away so no one could ever hurt you. I was so wrong. Standing there in my new kitchen, I finally understood. A boundary is not a wall, it is a gate. And for the first time in my 30 years, I was the one holding the key. I could swing it open for people who brought kindness, support, and real honesty into my life. And I could bolt it shut against anyone who just wanted to drain my spirit to feed their own ego. My family was locked out. They would never watch our son take his first steps on this land. They'd never eat at the farmhouse table, Liam and I, restored. They would never feel the peace of this place, because they had proven again and again they had no respect for it. The sound of sharp heels on the lobby floor pulled me from my thoughts. I turned to see Miss Vance, my attorney, walking toward our meeting spot. She held a single slim folder, and her presence radiated a calm, unshakable confidence. Miss Vance was a bulldog disguised as a diplomat. She sat across the table from me. She didn't even open her folder. She simply glanced at the spreadsheets I'd printed out, absorbing the scope of the financial fraud I'd untangled from my father's business. "You've done a remarkable job here, Amelia," Ms. Vance said, her voice even and full of respect. "These blueprints are my declaration of independence, not a cry for a settlement. The Vance family is terrified. It wasn't about revenge, just truth. You just need to draw your own lines and defend them." My lawyer saw the double meaning right away. She snapped her briefcase shut, the sound echoing our victory. "Keep building, Clara," she said. "I'll call on Monday when they officially surrender." She left, a quiet warrior in a city of predators. I just tilted my head back towards the sun. Leo was by the park entrance with 2 cold-pressed juices. He was in his usual work shirt, smelling of fresh soil and sunshine, a man who couldn't care less about the Miami art scene that had consumed my life. He just handed me the drink. It was crisp, real, and exactly what I needed. He didn't ask about the lawyers. He just wrapped an arm around my shoulder, that solid, quiet strength that had been my anchor through it all. I leaned into him, closed my eyes, and let the morning sun warm my face. I was no longer the cheated-on wife. I wasn't the woman waiting by the phone for a husband who was out with his new artist. I was Clara, an architect, building my own life from the foundation up. And next to me was my brother, who knew my value long before Julian's curated world shattered. People say time heals everything. It's a nice thing to write in a card, usually by people who haven't felt the sting of real betrayal. But healing isn't about time. It's about realizing you don't need the one who broke you. You don't need their approval, their empty apologies, or their permission to be happy. You have to stop setting yourself on fire just to keep their world warm. If you're listening right now and you're in a relationship that makes you feel unseen, if you've spent years shrinking yourself so that someone else could feel big, then listen closely. You are not required to accept mistreatment just because they call it love. You have every right to stand up, walk away, and build your own damn skyline. It's going to feel terrifying. That first silence will sound like a hurricane, but I swear to you, the calm waiting on the other side is worth fighting every single battle to reach it. Have you ever had to finally turn the lock on a toxic relationship for good? Did you ever give up on getting an apology you knew was never coming? Let me know your story in the comments. I read as many as I can because your story of survival matters. You are not alone in this fight, and your own peace is the trophy. Be good to yourself. We tend to plant our idea of a partner in the garden of our own hopes. We water it, shape it, and then act surprised when the relationship has no deep roots. Clara and Julian's story isn't just about a wealthy man cheating. It's a story about modern relationships and the quiet, toxic ways we abandon the people we vow to protect. When a partnership becomes about assets and appearances, love stops being a connection. It becomes a transaction. We forget our role isn't to curate a perfect spouse, but to be a loyal partner. In the drive to maintain a perfect public image, many fall for the trophy wife trap. We saw it with Julian. He put Clara on display like a sculpture in his gallery. He paid for her lifestyle and curated her image, but he completely neglected her soul. But curating a perfect life until you've lost touch with reality isn't strength. It's a fatal flaw. By closing himself off from real connection and propping up his ego with money and affairs, Julian became fragile and hollow. He navigated his world by throwing money at his problems with no real principles to guide him. All the while, the emotionally neglected partner, Clara, was forced into the shadows of her own life story. Every person in a partnership deserves a voice, and that voice should never be conditional on how well you play a role for the public. We think of violence as something that leaves bruises, but emotional abuse carves scars that can last forever. Julian waged a quiet war on her spirit. He saw his wife not as a partner, but as an accessory for his social climb. He chose the cheap thrill of an affair over the health of his pregnant wife and their unborn child. When a man calls his partner too sensitive for being hurt by his lies, he's saying her feelings don't matter unless they fit his narrative. A real partnership requires emotional honesty and the courage to actually listen, not just wait for your turn to speak. When someone chooses to be absent during the biggest moments of your life together, they aren't just missing a party. They are shattering a trust that may never be repaired, leaving a scar that never fully fades. If you've ever felt alone in your own house, or had to be your own hero because the person who was supposed to protect you disappeared, you are not alone. Hit subscribe and join our community. We share these stories because telling your own truth is the only victory that counts. The real lesson here is the difference between cut flowers and a plant with deep roots. Society loves cut flowers. We praise the fast car, the perfect social media post, the beautiful young artist on a rich man's arm. The affair with Sasha was just that, a cut flower, living off the borrowed light from a broken marriage and the excitement of a secret. But a gorgeous bouquet, no matter its price, starts dying the second it's cut. Clara, on the other hand, was the rooted plant, She was ignored, left to grow in the shadows, and forced to weather every storm alone. But in that solitude, she found her own power. She built new skills, grew stronger, and developed a will of iron. So when the cold front of scandal and financial ruin finally arrived, the beautiful facade crumbled overnight. But the deep roots? They held firm and they grew. A parent's true job is to protect those roots. They say a father should clear the way for his children, not become the roadblock. If he won't, he has no right to stand in their garden. Parents are meant to be guides, not the first monsters their children have to defeat, or the ones who profit from their wins. As kids grow up, that family dynamic has to change. It means teaching them the power of healthy boundaries, which isn't about building angry walls. Clara learned that a boundary isn't a wall to keep people out. It's a locked gate, and she holds the only key. Respect is the foundation of any adult relationship. It has to be earned with integrity, not just demanded because you share a last name like Vance. We must teach our kids to build their lives on competence and character, not on scheming and lies. When we teach them to protect their own peace, we give them the only shield they'll ever need in a world that wants to break them. The quiet in a house after a family breaks is a heavy thing. Betraying your own child's trust is a fracture that can change everything, permanently. The Vance family discovered way too late that forgiveness isn't something you can just demand. It requires real remorse and an honest accounting for the damage done, not just a desperate plea for silence when the scandal is about to break. Love must be offered for who a person is, long before the walls they build become impossible to scale. As we sit at our own tables with our own families, we should ask what kind of garden we're growing. Are we tending to roots that can withstand a hurricane? Or just arranging cut flowers, hoping for one more perfect day? Look at the people around you right now. Think about your words and what they leave behind. Because sooner or later the storm comes for all of us. And the only thing left standing is what you truly took the time to build.